This is day 2 of a 6-part series on me eating 6 unique meals for only $2.50 a day. The rules are simple. For this week, I can only consume food that I bought at the beginning of the week for $15, though I am allowing myself reasonable amounts of spices. I am releasing a video every day for these 6 days, so stay tuned and enjoy. So for day 2, I decided to utilize my can of chickpeas, along with the flour and yeast, to make hummus and pita bread. This is my first time making either of these, so we'll see how this goes. I started with the pita bread. This was based on Chef John's recipe. In a large bowl, I combined 149 grams of flour with about 240 milliliters of water and mixed them together with a wooden spoon. I added one of my packets of instant yeast and just let it sit to bloom and start eating some of the starches in the flour. While this was going, I needed to solve my lack of oil problem. To do this, I decided to turn some of my butter into clarified butter, or ghee. To do this is fairly simple. I just placed a stainless saucepot on the stovetop and turned the burner on high heat. I added 13 tablespoons, or about 182 grams of my butter to the skillet, and just gently swirled it for a couple of minutes until the butter melted, the water began to boil away, and the butter solids began to separate out. That's all I'm doing here, removing the water and the butter solids to leave the pure butter fat. Now, I didn't want those separated solids to burn, as that'll ruin the flavor. So just as the bubbling subsided, indicating the water was pretty much all gone, I removed the saucepot from the heat and strained the clarified butter/ghee through a strainer with cheesecloth, taking care to lose as little of that fat as possible. We are left with about 2/3 of a cup, or 145 grams of the ghee. This stuff is liquid gold. What can we use this for? Well, anytime we would use olive oil, we can substitute this in. For example, back at the pita dough, you can see that the yeast has been working. To this, I add a tablespoon or so of salt and 15 grams of our melted ghee. I mixed this in and began adding in flour as I mixed. My goal was a slightly sticky dough, and I kept adding flour as the dough absorbed it. Eventually, I had to get in there with my hands and start kneading. Once I got the hydration I wanted, adding a total of 194 grams of flour in the process, I removed the dough from the bowl and continued kneading to develop the gluten. I did this for an additional 5 minutes until the dough was smooth, supple, and bounced back slightly when poked. In a new bowl, I added 2 grams of the ghee and, rolling the dough ball to coat it in the fat, covered it with a towel to rise until doubled in size, about 2 hours. This done, I lightly floured my work surface and stretched and pressed down the dough into a rough rectangle. I then cut the dough into 8 roughly equal portions and rolled them firmly into balls. I know they don't look great, but these ended up turning out alright, so I don't think rolling them like this is that big of an issue. I then let these rest, covered for a bit, while I prepared some stuff for day 3, which I will get into towards the end of this video. Regardless, after resting, the dough balls were looking good, so I went ahead and dusted them with a bit of flour. I took my rolling pin and carefully rolled out all of the dough balls into 1/4-inch thick circles, covering them as I went to ensure they didn't dry out. On the stove, I took a cast iron pan and set the burner to medium-high. As the pan was heating up, I added 15 grams of the now solidified ghee and just let that melt and come up to temperature. Once it was shimmering, I carefully laid in one of the pita breads, and I let that go for about 3 minutes, until it was bubbled up, and when flipped, the bottom had a nice golden color. I then cooked the bottom for a minute or so, removed it to a plate, and tossed in the next loaf, and continued this way for all 8 of the rounds. I didn't catch it on film, but I did have one of the pita breads completely rise into a ball for me, so that was pretty cool. During this process, I went ahead and made my hummus using the chickpeas. I removed the lid to the can and thoroughly strained and rinsed the beans in the sink. I realize now that I could have saved the bean water for other things, but, well, that's something to think about for next time. From there, I simply poured the beans into a food processor, along with another 15 grams of ghee, a healthy pinch of salt, some garlic powder, a bit of citric acid powder, and a shake of cumin. I then pulsed that until the hummus reached the desired consistency. Now, to be honest, this is my first time making hummus, and like my second time trying it, so I'm hoping this turned out alright. And here is the finished platter of hummus and pita bread. I went ahead and cut the pita into triangles. As you can see, I went ahead and sprinkled a little salt over the hummus along with red pepper flake and a line of smoked paprika. As you can see, my bread was too soft for scooping, so I had to use a spoon to get it onto the quarters. Now I ask that you please excuse my haste in eating this, but by the time I was done with 2 rises of the dough, rolling it out, and cooking it, it was nearly 11 p.m., and I had not eaten anything since the gnocchi the night before, so I was understandably very ready for this meal. And it turned out pretty great. I didn't quite finish everything, but here are the calorie, cost, and macro breakdowns for this meal. Still not as much protein as I would like, but the calorie amount is right where I'd like it. Hopefully tomorrow's meal will be a little bit better balanced. Speaking of which, remember that I was preparing something earlier while the dough balls were resting? Well, for that, I was just mixing 300 grams of flour with 164 milliliters of water and 6 grams of salt. Using my hands, I formed it into a shaggy dough and just kneaded it for about 5 minutes, covering it with a towel afterwards. Skipping forward to after dinner, I took the now rested dough ball and kneaded that on the countertop for another 7 minutes or so to really develop that gluten. Now I really felt that I should have gone further, but it was 11:30 on a work night, so I just went ahead and wrapped it in plastic wrap, tossed it in the fridge, and went to bed. I'll show you tomorrow what I ended up making with that. Regardless, thanks for watching.